My son's birthday party guest made me question if I was even his real father. Full story. I 35M believe my wife 34F has cheated on me over 6 years ago. I gathered this together after a lot of frustration and sleepless nights. Tried to make it compact. Please bear with me. We have been together for 10 years, married for 7. We have a 6-year-old son, our only child. We met during our studies but always worked in different places, quite literally opposite side of the city. I started noticing something after our son's birthday. He looks a lot like my wife's coworker, direct boss. He stands, walks, even holds his hand in a similar manner. There are no obvious similarities like skin, hair, or eye color. Perhaps the nose shape a little. Why was this man at my son's birthday party? No clue. Never stopped to think about it until now. He always seemed like a good guy, never caught him up to anything weird. Thought he was a good friend of my wife from work. Seemed fun with kids as well. Only weird instance, in hindsight, was when he accompanied my wife and son for a day out when I had work. The only other reason I believe my wife has cheated is because if I track back exactly 9 months from the birth date of my son, I get to a week where my wife was on a work-related trip for 4 days, and yes, as far as I know, that coworker was there as well. I know that's not how that works, but still find it suspicious. But there are several reasons I believe I might be just seeing things. Mainly that we rarely have any big fights about anything. We always solved our problems quite well. Secondly, we have a great sex life, and know this is not just a one-sided opinion. We are open to each other and haven't had major problems. We disagree sometimes, but as I said, we always manage to solve it. In all, I'm not sure what to do with this situation. I don't want to accuse my wife without solid proof, but not knowing is extremely frustrating. How do I get solid proof, or what even is the next step? Okay, so I posted that a few weeks ago, and the response I got was overwhelming. People told me I was crazy, that I was projecting, that I was going to destroy a good marriage over a nose shape and a birthday party guest. A few people, though a quiet few, told me to trust my gut. I want to give everyone the full update, because things have moved significantly since that first post, and I owe it to the people who sat with me in that uncertainty to tell them where I ended up. Let me back up and fill in some of the details I left out the first time, because context matters here. My wife's name is Rachel. I'm Daniel. We met in our junior year of college at a state university in the Midwest, in a general education sociology class neither of us wanted to be in. She sat 2 rows ahead of me, and used to turn around and make faces at the professor's back whenever he said something particularly pretentious, which was often. I thought she was the funniest person I had ever seen. We were inseparable within 3 weeks. Dated through the rest of college, survived a pretty rough stretch when we first moved to the city and were both broke and stressed and working jobs we hated, and then things slowly got better. She got promoted. I found work I actually liked in logistics management. We got married when I was 28, she was 27, in a small outdoor ceremony with about 60 people, and it was honestly one of the best days of my life. No caveats. It was genuinely great. Our son is named Owen. He turned 6 in March, and his birthday party was at one of those indoor bounce house places with the pizza that tastes like cardboard and the tokens for arcade games. 20-something screaming kids, a sheet cake with a dinosaur on it, Rachel running around making sure everything went smoothly because that's just who she is. I was manning the pizza table and sweating through my shirt. It was chaotic and loud, and I loved every second of it. The man I mentioned in my original post is named Marcus. He's Rachel's direct supervisor at the marketing firm she's worked at for almost 9 years. I want to be careful how I describe him, because I genuinely have no personal grievance with this man based on anything he's ever done or said to me. He's tall, maybe 6'2", lean, has this kind of easy confidence about him. He's always been cordial when we've met at work events. He brought Owen a really nice remote control car for the birthday party, actually. Owen lost his mind over it. The thing is, and I want to be precise about this, I didn't walk into Owen's birthday party with any suspicion in my head whatsoever. I have replayed this in my mind dozens of times now, trying to figure out if I was projecting something after the fact, constructing a narrative around an observation that didn't mean anything. Because that's what a rational person has to ask themselves. But I keep coming back to this. The moment happened organically. I wasn't looking for it. What happened was, Owen was showing Marcus how he could do this little jump and spin move he'd been practicing, the way 6-year-olds will perform for literally anyone who gives them attention. And Marcus laughed and clapped and then crossed his arms while he watched Owen do it again, and he tilted his head slightly to the left. And I froze. Because I had seen that exact posture, that exact head tilt, on Owen 100 times. The way Owen stands when he's watching something he's impressed by. Left hand tucked under his right elbow, head just slightly angled. It's such a specific thing. I had always thought Owen picked it up from me, the way kids mirror their parents, but I do not do that. I know I don't, because I actually went home that night and stood in front of the bathroom mirror and tried to replicate it naturally and couldn't. I didn't say anything to Rachel that night. I didn't even fully process it until I was lying awake at 2 in the morning, and the thought just dropped into my head like a stone into still water. Why does my son look like Marcus? I want to be very honest about the next few weeks because they were not my finest. I became obsessive in a way I'm not proud of. I started pulling up old photos on my phone, on Rachel's Instagram, on the family photo albums we kept on the laptop. Comparing. Looking at Owen's face from different angles and trying to map it onto Rachel's features, onto mine, onto Marcus's. It's a disturbing thing to do, staring at your child's face like it's evidence. I felt sick doing it, and I couldn't stop. The nose thing I mentioned in my original post, it's not dramatic. Owen doesn't have Marcus's nose exactly, but there's something in the bridge of it, the way it sits on his face, that doesn't come from Rachel and doesn't come from me. I have a wide, flat nose. Rachel's is small and upturned. Owen's has this slight ridge to it, narrow and defined. I had always just assumed it was some recessive genetic thing, a grandparent somewhere. My dad had a nose like that, actually. So I kept talking myself back off the ledge every time I climbed onto it. The other thing I did, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, was go back through old text messages. Rachel and I share a family plan, and she's never been secretive about her phone. She leaves it on the counter, face up. She'll hand it to me to show me something without thinking twice. That's always been true of our relationship, this kind of casual openness. So when she was in the shower one evening, I picked up her phone and went looking. I didn't find anything concrete. What I found was a clean phone, in the way that sometimes a very clean phone feels like its own kind of red flag. Not because Rachel is a particularly sentimental person who saves every message she isn't, but because the conversation thread with Marcus was just completely professional. Work updates, forwarded documents, scheduling confirmations. Nothing personal at all, not even the kind of low-stakes friendly banter most coworkers have. It could mean absolutely nothing, or it could mean someone had been careful. I closed the phone and put it back before she got out of the shower, and I hated myself a little for what I had just done. About 2 weeks after the birthday party, I brought it up with my friend Greg. Greg and I have been close since high school. He's the kind of guy who will tell you when you're being an idiot, and who will also drive 2 hours to help you move a couch without complaining. I told him the whole thing, the posture, the nose, the work trip, the clean text thread, and waited. He stared at me for a long moment and then said, very calmly, Daniel, you are describing a man who stands a certain way and a nose shape. That's what you have. I said I knew that I knew it sounded thin. It doesn't just sound thin, Greg said. It is thin. Rachel is one of the most straightforward people I've ever met. You guys have been solid for 10 years. You're going to blow that up because your kid tilts his head a certain way. I told him I wasn't planning to blow anything up. I just couldn't stop thinking about it. Then go to therapy, he said. Work through whatever anxiety spiral you're in, but do not go to Rachel with this. Because if you're wrong, and I genuinely think you are, you will not be able to unsay it. That should have settled it for me, and for about a week, it almost did. Then I found the photograph. I was cleaning out the spare room, which we use as a combination home office and storage space, and I came across a box of stuff from Rachel's old apartment, things she'd never fully unpacked when we moved in together, just boxed up and shoved onto a shelf. Mostly junk. Some college textbooks, a few decorative items, an old planner from what looked like her mid-20s. I almost didn't open the planner. I put it aside twice before I finally flipped through it. It was from the year Owen was conceived. I know that because Rachel was meticulous about her planners back then, she wrote everything down, appointments, reminders, even little personal notes sometimes. And there, during the week of that work trip, she had written in her looping handwriting, Chicago conference, M coming, should be good. M. I stood in that spare room for a long time holding that planner. M could mean anything. M could be a colleague named Michelle or Michael. It almost certainly meant something completely innocent. But I had been walking around for weeks with this low hum of dread in my chest, and looking at that initial felt like confirmation of something I couldn't name. I put the planner in my desk drawer, and didn't tell anyone about it for several days. What I did instead was something I'm more conflicted about. I reached out, through a mutual contact, to get Marcus's last name and look him up on social media. His LinkedIn was public. And on his LinkedIn, in his profile photo that looked about 5 or 6 years old, I could see clearly that he has a narrow, defined nose with a slight ridge to the bridge of it. I sat with my laptop in the dark at 11:30 at night staring at a LinkedIn photo, and I genuinely didn't know if I was a man with legitimate instincts or a man in the middle of a psychological breakdown. The next day I called my older sister, Diane. Diane is 11 years older than me, has been through her own painful divorce, and has absolutely no tolerance for either self-pity or willful blindness. I told her everything. She was quiet for a while, then she asked me one question, does Rachel know you suspect anything? I said no. Good, Diane said. Keep it that way until you know what you actually want to do. Because Daniel, here is the thing you have to understand, you have 2 possible worlds in front of you right now. In one of them, Rachel cheated on you 6 years ago, Owen might not be biologically yours, and your entire understanding of your marriage is wrong. In the other one, you're a man who let a birthday party spiral into an obsession, and you owe your wife a significant apology. You cannot know which world you're in from a LinkedIn photo and a planner initial, so figure out which one you're actually in before you do anything you can't take back. She was right. I knew she was right. And I knew that the only way to figure out which world I was in was a paternity test. The idea of doing a paternity test on your own child, secretly, without your wife's knowledge, is genuinely one of the more disturbing things I have ever had to sit with. I want to be honest about that. I read everything about it. I looked up the legality in my state. I ordered a home test kit to a P.O. box I set up specifically for this, which felt like the most paranoid thing I had ever done in my life. I swabbed Owen's cheek one morning, while Rachel was making coffee and he was still sleepy and cuddly on the couch, and I told him I was playing doctor, and he laughed and let me do it, and I went into the bathroom and processed the sample and felt like a complete monster. I mailed it the following day. The results were estimated to take between 7 and 10 business days. Those 10 days were the worst of my recent memory. Rachel and I went about our lives completely normally. We had dinner together every night. We helped Owen with his letters and numbers. We watched TV in bed. We had sex twice, and both times I lay there afterward feeling like I was living inside a glass box, able to see everything around me but completely separated from it. She didn't notice anything was wrong, or if she did, she didn't say anything, and I couldn't decide which possibility felt worse. On the 9th day, I got an email notification that my results were ready in the portal. I was at work. I closed my office door and sat down and opened my laptop and stared at the login page for a full 3 minutes before I typed in my credentials. The results came back as 0% probability of paternity. I'm Owen's father. I want to describe what that moment felt like because it wasn't what I expected. I had prepared myself for two outcomes, and I had assumed that the positive outcome, me being Owen's father, would feel like immediate relief, like a weight lifting. It didn't. Not right away. What it felt like first was a kind of total blankness, like my brain refused to process it immediately, like it had been braced for impact so hard that the absence of impact was itself disorienting. Then slowly, something else settled in. Not just relief, something more complicated than relief. Because here's the thing, getting that result should have been the end of it. Owen is my son, full stop. The physical question, the biological question, was answered clearly and definitively. I should have closed the laptop, gone home, hugged my kid, and let the whole nightmare dissolve. But I didn't feel like the whole nightmare could dissolve. Because the test told me who Owen's father was. It didn't tell me anything about what happened in Chicago. I know how that sounds. I've had 3 separate people tell me I need to let it go at this point. Greg, when I finally told him about the test, looked at me with something close to exasperation. Daniel, he said, your son is your son, you have your answer. Why are you still pulling on this thread? I tried to explain it to him. That for me, at this point, it wasn't purely about Owen's paternity anymore. It was about whether my wife had slept with someone else, full stop. Whether our marriage, the foundation of it, the story I had been telling myself about who we were, was based on something that wasn't true. The test resolved the worst-case scenario. It did not resolve the actual question of whether I had been lied to. Greg thought I was being irrational. He said that I had already done irreparable psychological damage to myself over what turned out to be nothing, and that pursuing it further was going to cost me my marriage for absolutely no reason. He wasn't unkind about it, but he was firm. Diane was more measured. She said she understood why I still felt unresolved, but she also said something that stuck with me. You are going to have to choose at some point, Daniel, between the need to know and the life you have, because you may never be able to have both. If Rachel did something 6 years ago and it meant nothing and your son is yours and your marriage is good, is the confession worth what it would do to your family? That's not a rhetorical question. You actually have to answer it. I didn't have an answer for her. What I did instead, and I don't know if this was brave or stupid or both, was come home one Friday night after Owen was in bed and sit down with Rachel at the kitchen table and tell her that I had been struggling with something for the past few weeks and I needed to talk to her about it. She immediately looked concerned. She put her wine glass down and turned toward me fully and said, "Okay, what's going on?" I had rehearsed this a dozen times and none of the rehearsals helped. I said, "This is going to sound like it's coming from nowhere, and I need you to hear me out before you react." She nodded. Her face was careful, the way it gets when she knows something serious is coming. I told her about the birthday party, about noticing the way Owen stood, about not being able to stop thinking about it. I didn't mention the test. I didn't mention the planner. I just told her what I had noticed and what it had done to me over the last several weeks. The silence that followed was long enough that I started to feel sick. Then Rachel said quietly, "You think Owen isn't yours?" I said I didn't think that anymore. I said I had worked through it, and I was fairly sure I was projecting, but that I needed to say it out loud to her, because carrying it alone was eating me alive. She didn't explode. That's the thing I wasn't prepared for. I expected either immediate tearful denial or immediate rage, and what I got instead was this kind of stillness. She looked at the table for a moment, and then she looked at me and said, "Marcus is not Owen's father, Daniel." "I know," I said, "I know that." "Do you?" she asked, and there was something in her voice I couldn't fully read. Not guilt exactly, but something careful. I said, "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be honest with me." She said, "Okay." "Did anything happen between you and Marcus? Ever, at any point?" Another silence, shorter this time, but there. "We kissed," she said. "Once, at a conference, years ago, before Owen. We had both been drinking and it went nowhere and I ended it immediately and it never happened again and I have regretted it every day since because it was stupid and meaningless and it was the one thing I have never been able to figure out how to tell you." The kitchen was very quiet. "One kiss," I said. "One kiss," she said. "That's everything, I swear to you that is everything." I sat there and looked at my wife, this woman I had known for 10 years, who had made faces at a professor's back to make me laugh, who had cried at our wedding, who had held my hand through 42 hours of labor with Owen, who made coffee every morning and left mine on the counter without being asked, and I tried to figure out what I was feeling. It wasn't the earthquake I had been bracing for. It was something smaller and in some ways worse, a crack in something I had believed was solid, not a collapse, a crack. We talked for 3 hours that night. She cried, I didn't, which surprised me. She told me the full context, a work conference, an industry dinner, too much wine, a moment in a hotel lobby that she had shut down and walked away from and never revisited. She told me she had considered telling me for years and had always found a reason not to, because it was over, because it meant nothing, because she didn't want to blow up something good over a moment of weakness that she was deeply ashamed of. She told me she loved me. She said it the way she has always said it, directly and without decoration, looking at me straight. And I believed her, that's the maddening part. I believed every word she said. The conversation didn't end cleanly. There was no dramatic resolution, no tearful reconciliation where everything was forgiven and the music swelled. We went to bed without having resolved anything. I lay awake in the dark next to her and stared at the ceiling and thought about all of it. The confession, the planner, the LinkedIn photo, Owen's little head tilt that had started the whole thing, and I tried to figure out what I was supposed to do with this information. In the days since we have talked more, we're seeing a couples therapist, a woman named Dr. Patricia Holloway who has the energy of someone who has heard everything and is not surprised by any of it, which is comforting. Rachel has been completely transparent. She gave me access to everything I asked for. She answered every question I had, even the painful ones. She has not been defensive or deflective. She has been, in the most genuine sense, accountable. And I have tried to be honest with myself about my own role in all of this, because here's something I haven't fully said yet. I did a secret paternity test on my son. I went through my wife's belongings. I dug through old text messages. I spent weeks constructing a case against my wife in my head before I ever spoke to her directly. And when Greg and Diane both told me to let it go, my instinct was to push harder, to keep pulling. Was I right to be suspicious? In a narrow technical sense, there was a kiss. There was a hidden thing, my instinct that something had happened wasn't entirely wrong. But the shape of what happened and the shape of what I feared were wildly different. I feared a 6-year lie about the parentage of my child. What I found was a single drunken kiss that my wife had spent years regretting and couldn't find the courage to confess. Are those the same thing? I genuinely don't know. Some days it feels like a vast difference, like relief, like the marriage is intact and what we need to do now is repair and move forward. Other days it feels like the trust equation in my head has been altered in a way I can't fully articulate, and I'm not sure the math will ever come out the same way again. Owen has no idea any of this happened, and he won't. He's 6. He spent last weekend on the living room floor doing a puzzle with both of his parents, and he looked up at one point with this huge gap-toothed grin, and said, "You guys are the best," with the pure, uncomplicated certainty that only a child who has never had reason to doubt anything can manage, and I had to excuse myself to the kitchen for a minute. I think about what Greg said, that I was going to blow up a good marriage over a nose shape and a birthday party. He wasn't wrong about the nose shape being nothing, but he also didn't know what I know now, which is that there was a small, hidden thing in my marriage that Rachel had been carrying for years and couldn't tell me. Whether a kiss counts as enough of a betrayal to justify what have put both of us through over the past month, the test, the planner, the covert surveillance of my own life, I honestly can't say. I asked Dr. Holloway in our second session whether she thought I had been justified. She said that in her experience, the question of justification was usually less useful than the question of what I wanted to build from here. I told her that felt like a very therapeutic non-answer. She smiled and said, "Most of the useful answers are. Marcus no longer comes to family events." Rachel told him, after our conversation, that it was no longer appropriate, and he apparently agreed without pushback. I don't know what he knows or what he thinks, and I have deliberately chosen not to pursue that. There's enough damage to manage without adding that variable. Owen is still Owen. He still does the head tilt. I watched him do it last Thursday while he was watching a cartoon and I felt, I don't know how to describe it, tender and complicated in equal measure. He's my kid. That's not in question. But the head tilt now comes with a small shadow attached to it, this reminder of how a completely ordinary gesture in a completely ordinary birthday party cracked open something that had been sealed away for years. Rachel asked me last night if I forgave her. We were in bed, and she asked it quietly, the way you ask a question you're genuinely afraid to hear the answer to. I said I was working on it. She nodded and said okay, and turned out the light. Here's where I actually am, for anyone who came here hoping for a tidy ending. We're still together. We are working on it in the most literal possible sense, actively, in therapy, in late-night kitchen conversations, in small daily choices to try to be honest with each other about things we might otherwise smooth over. I love my wife. I believe she loves me. I believe the kiss was what she said it was. I believe my son is my son and that our family is real and worth saving. But I also know that I swabbed my own child's cheek in secret and mailed it to a lab, and I don't entirely know how to reconcile the person who did that with the person I thought I was. Was I a man protecting himself from a potential devastation, doing the rational thing given the information available? Or was I someone who had already decided his wife was guilty and was collecting evidence to confirm it, unable to tolerate ambiguity, willing to go to genuinely invasive lengths to resolve a discomfort that might have dissolved on its own? Greg thinks I pushed too hard and got lucky, that I stumbled into a confession that could have just as easily destroyed a marriage over nothing. Diane thinks I had a right to know, and Rachel's years of silence are the actual problem. Rachel thinks we both failed each other, in different ways, at different times. Dr. Holloway is professionally not sharing her opinion, which I'm finding increasingly annoying. And I sit here, on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee, while my son watches cartoons in the next room and my wife sleeps upstairs, and I turn the whole thing over and over in my hands like a stone I can't put down. A single kiss, years ago, buried and never spoken of. Weeks of my own covert behavior, driven by a birthday party posture and a nose shape and a letter in a planner. A marriage that is still standing but is standing differently than it was 2 months ago. I don't know if I did the right thing. I don't know if I handled any of this the right way. I don't know if the version of my marriage that comes out the other side of this will be better or worse or just different. I know that I love my family. I know that some things, once seen, cannot be unseen. And I know that the question I keep circling back to, the one I can't seem to answer no matter how many times I approach it from a different angle, is whether I was a man who trusted his gut and found a truth his wife should have told him long ago, or whether I was a man who went looking for a fire and caused one by looking. I still don't know. I'm not sure I ever will.